What happens when a first-class flight attendant, fueled by bitterness and a secret agenda, unleashes a tirade of abuse on a quiet teenage girl? She doesn't know the girl is the daughter of a titan of industry. She doesn't know her father isn't just any CEO. He's the airline's single most important client. One quiet phone call is about to trigger a chain reaction of devastating consequences that will not only end careers, but expose a criminal conspiracy proving that sometimes the fall isn't just from 30,000 feet, it's from the very pinnacle of a carefully constructed life into absolute ruin. The first-class cabin of Trans-Atlantic Airways Flight 117 from New York to London was an oasis of engineered tranquility. The gentle hum of the Rolls-Royce engines was a lullaby for the privileged, a sound muted by noise-cancelling Bose headphones and the clink of ice in glasses of champagne. For 16-year-old Maya Washington, however, the peace was fragile. She sat by the window, her sketchbook open on her lap, but her charcoal pencil remained still. Her gaze was fixed on the clouds below a churning sea of white that mirrored the anxiety in her stomach. Flying was a necessary evil in her life. It was the metal tube that transported her between her mother's art gallery in Manhattan and her father's sprawling tech empire in London. Today her father, Robert Washington, was with her, seated across the aisle. He wasn't looking at the spreadsheets on his tablet or taking calls through his satellite link. He was watching her, his brow furrowed with the gentle concern that was his default expression when it came to his daughter. Robert Washington was a man who defied stereotypes. He was the founder and CEO of Innovate Solutions, a global logistics and software firm worth billions. He was also a black man who had clawed his way up from a working-class neighborhood in Detroit, armed with nothing but a brilliant mind and an unshakable will. He wore his success not like a crown, but like a well-tailored suit. It was a part of him, but it didn't define his core. His true treasure was Maya. She was his heart walking outside his body. He saw the same quiet intensity in her that had driven him, but in her it was channeled into art, into capturing the world's fleeting moments through her sketches and the lens of her beloved Leica camera, which was nestled safely in its worn leather bag at her feet. "Everything okay, superstar?" Robert asked, his voice a low baritone that cut cleanly through the cabin's hum. Maya offered a small, reassuring smile. "Just thinking, the clouds look like angry mountains today." He followed her gaze. "I see it. Maybe they're just in a hurry like us." The lead flight attendant, a woman named Clare Henderson, approached their seats. She was in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled into a severe chignon and a smile that seemed painted on cracking at the edges. There was a coiled tension in her posture, a sense of weary resentment that her uniform couldn't conceal. She had worked for Trans-Atlantic for 22 years, and the initial glamour of the job had long since faded, replaced by the monotonous reality of serving entitled passengers, while her own life felt stalled and unremarkable. "Mr. Washington," she said, her voice a practiced, honeyed tone. "Can I get you another sparkling water before we begin our main service?" "I'm fine." "Thank you, Claire." Robert replied, his tone polite but distant. He'd learned to read people with uncanny accuracy, and his internal alarm gave a faint ping whenever Claire was near. He'd noticed her fleeting, dismissive glances toward Maya, the way her eyes lingered for a microsecond too long on her daughter's designer hoodie and expensive sneakers. Claire then turned to Maya, her smile tightening. "And for the young lady, just water is fine." "Thank you," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes darting back to the window. Claire's eyes dropped to the leather camera bag at Maya's feet. It was a beautiful vintage-style bag, the kind of thing that screamed quiet luxury. "Ma'am, you'll need to stow that bag in the overhead compartment. It cannot remain on the floor during the flight." Maya looked up confused. "Oh, but it's small and it's tucked all the way under the seat in front of me. It's not in the aisle." "It is airline policy," Claire said, her voice losing its sweetness, replaced by a sharp, metallic edge. "All larger bags must be stowed for safety." Robert leaned forward slightly. "Claire, with all due respect, that bag fits the personal item dimensions perfectly. She's had it at her feet on dozens of your flights. It's not an obstruction." Claire's smile vanished completely. She seemed to take Robert's calm correction as a personal affront. Her gaze swept over Maya again, a flicker of something ugly. Envy, prejudice, pure spite in her eyes. She saw a young black girl in first class, dressed in expensive clothes, with an even more expensive piece of equipment, and her mind, soured by years of perceived slights and personal failures, jumped to a conclusion. "Sir, I am the lead attendant on this flight. I am responsible for the safety of this cabin. The bag needs to go up. Now." Her tone was no longer that of a service professional, but of a petty tyrant wielding her minuscule authority like a cudgel. Other passengers began to stir their curiosity, piqued by the shift in tone. A man in the seat behind Robert lowered his newspaper. Across the aisle, a woman paused her movie. Robert held Claire's gaze. He could have escalated, could have pulled rank, but his first priority was to de-escalate for Maya's sake. "Very well," he said smoothly. "Maya, let's just put it up for now. You can get it down later." With trembling hands, Maya unbuckled her seatbelt, retrieved the bag, and stood to place it in the empty space in the overhead bin above her seat. As she did, the bag slipped slightly from her grasp. She caught it, but not before it swung and gently bumped the arm of a passenger seated in front of her, a portly man in a tweed jacket. "Oh my gosh! I am so sorry," Maya gasped, her face flushing with embarrassment. The man waved a hand dismissively. "No harm done, my dear." "Not at all." But Claire saw her opening. This was the justification she needed. This was the spark to light her fuse. Unbelievable, Claire's voice was no longer sharp. It was a shriek that ripped through the cabin's decorum. Every head snapped in her direction. "You see, this is precisely why it needs to be stowed. You're careless. You could have injured someone with that thing." Maya froze, her hands still on the bag, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. The accusation was so disproportionate to the gentle tap that it made no sense. It was like being screamed at for a sneeze. "That's enough," Robert said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. He was on his feet now, standing protectively beside his daughter. "You are completely out of line." But Claire was beyond reason. She was on a stage of her own making, fueled by a toxic cocktail of professional jealousy and deep-seated bigotry. She pointed a trembling finger at Maya. "Out of line, I'm trying to maintain safety. And this girl with her attitude is endangering passengers. People pay thousands of dollars for a peaceful flight, not to be assaulted by clumsy teenagers with bags they probably can't even afford." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The implication was clear ugly, and aimed directly at the color of Maya's skin. A collective gasp went through the cabin. Maya's eyes welled with tears, the sting of the words hitting her harder than any physical blow. She wasn't just being scolded. She was being erased, reduced to a stereotype. "That's it," Robert said, his voice like ice. "I want to speak to the purser. Now." A male flight attendant, Mark, who held the senior title of purser, hurried over. He was a man who prized a quiet life and avoided confrontation at all costs. He saw the scene, his lead attendant, apoplectic, a powerful-looking man radiating fury, and a crying teenager. His instinct was to placate, to smooth things over, which, in his mind, meant backing his crew. "Is there a problem here, sir?" Mark asked, directing the question to Robert, but looking at Clare for his cue. "A problem?" Clare laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Yes, there's a problem." This passenger's daughter was careless with her luggage, struck another passenger, and is refusing to follow crew instructions. And now he is becoming aggressive. It was a masterful, vicious lie, twisting the entire sequence of events. Robert stared at Mark, expecting him to see through the charade. That is a complete fabrication. Your attendant initiated this entire conflict over a bag that was safely stowed, and she just verbally assaulted my daughter with a prejudiced and insulting tirade. Mark looked from Clare's furious face to Robert's stony one. Siding with the passenger meant a lengthy report and a conflict with his lead attendant. Siding with Clare was easier. It was the path of least resistance. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat," Mark said, his tone attempting authority, but laced with weakness. "Clare is our most experienced attendant. I trust her judgment. Let's not make this a bigger issue than it needs to be." The betrayal was stunning. The entire system was closing ranks, protecting its own against the truth. A younger attendant, a woman named Chloe with wide, frightened eyes, watched from the galley, her hand over her mouth. She knew what Clare had said was wrong. She saw the whole thing. But she was new on probation and terrified of Clare. She remained silent, a decision that would haunt her. A bigger issue. Robert's voice was low, but it carried an authority that Mark's lacked. "You have no idea what a big issue this is about to become." He turned to his daughter, who was now openly weeping, her shoulders shaking. He wrapped an arm around her, his heart breaking. He guided her back to her seat, ignoring the stares of the other passengers. He buckled her in, wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, and whispered, "It's okay, baby. I've got you. They made a mistake. A very, very big mistake." The captain's voice came over the intercom, an announcement about turbulence ahead, but the real turbulence was in the first-class cabin. For the rest of the flight, Clare Henderson patrolled the aisle with a smug, triumphant look on her face. She had won. She had put the entitled passenger and his daughter in their place. She felt a surge of power she hadn't felt in years. She had no idea that she wasn't just flying toward London. She was flying toward the complete and utter demolition of her life. The descent into Heathrow Airport was cloaked in a tense, suffocating silence. The crew following Clare's lead treated Robert and Maya like phantoms, pointedly ignoring their presence. Maya kept her face turned to the window, but she wasn't seeing the patchwork of green fields and grey city spreading below. She was replaying the humiliation, the sting of Clare's words, the feeling of being judged and found wanting for no reason at all. Robert, however, was a picture of absolute calm. His anger had not dissipated. It had crystallized into something hard and sharp. It was a cold, focused rage he reserved for true injustice. He had endured countless slights and microaggressions on his climb to the top. He had learned to choose his battles. But this was not a battle he had chosen. It had been brought to his daughter, to the one person he would move heaven and earth to protect. And for that, there would be a reckoning. As soon as the plane docked at the gate and the seatbelt sign pinged off, Robert placed a hand on Maya's arm. "Stay here for a minute. Let them all get off." He watched Clare, Mark, and the rest of the crew bustle about, their faces a mixture of professional indifference and, in Clare's case, smug satisfaction. They were oblivious, wrapped in the protective cocoon of their perceived authority. Once the cabin was nearly empty, Robert retrieved his phone. He didn't dial the airline's generic customer service number. He didn't look for a complaint form. He scrolled through his private contacts to a name saved simply as David M. TAA. David Macmillan, the chief executive officer of Trans-Atlantic Airways, was on the 18th hole of the Wentworth Club golf course, lining up a putt to win a friendly wager against a banking executive. His phone, held by his caddy, began to vibrate. He glanced at the screen and saw Robert Washington's name. His heart skipped a beat. A call from Robert Washington on a Friday afternoon was never just a social call. "I have to take this," David said, waving off his putt. He walked to the edge of the green. "Robert, to what do I owe the pleasure? I trust you're enjoying your flight." David Roberts' voice was devoid of warmth. It was flat cold and utterly serious. "My flight, TAA 177, just landed at Heathrow. And no, I did not enjoy it." David Macmillan felt a chill, despite the mild afternoon sun. "Robert, what's wrong? Was there a mechanical issue?" "The issue wasn't mechanical, David. It was human," Robert said. He then proceeded to recount the events of the flight with methodical precision. He left out no detail: Claire's initial hostility, the false pretense of the bag, the public screaming, the deeply prejudiced accusation that Maya couldn't afford her belongings, and finally the purser's deliberate decision to back the lie and dismiss his legitimate complaint. He spoke without emotion, which made the words all the more powerful. He was not a hysterical customer. He was a CEO delivering a damage report. On the other end of the line, the color drained from David Macmillan's face. He knew who Robert Washington was, not just as a fellow CEO, but as a client. Innovate Solutions was not just another corporate account for Trans-Atlantic Airways. It was the account. Their exclusive contract covering all domestic and international travel for over 20,000 employees was worth upwards of $300 million a year. It was a flagship partnership that David had personally boasted about to his board of directors just last quarter. The loss of that contract would be catastrophic, a black hole in their revenue that would send their stock price plummeting. "Robert, I am speechless." David stammered, his golf game completely forgotten. "That is unacceptable. It is horrifying. I cannot apologize enough." "Your apology is noted, David." Robert continued, his voice unyielding. "But apologies won't undo the humiliation my daughter was subjected to. She's 16, David, a child. And your crew, led by this woman, Clare Henderson, chose to make her a target for abuse in a cabin full of people." There was a pause. Robert let the silence hang a heavy weight on the line. "My company, Innovate Solutions, prides itself on diversity respect and a zero-tolerance policy for the kind of behavior my daughter and I experience today. It is the foundation of our corporate culture. I cannot, in good conscience, continue to channel hundreds of millions of dollars into a partner company that permits and even defends such venomous prejudice among its frontline staff." David's blood ran cold. He knew what was coming. "This is what is going to happen." Robert stated his voice, now leaving no room for negotiation. "You are going to deal with this situation. You are going to deal with it now. I want a full report on my desk by Monday morning, detailing the actions you have taken. And David, if I am not completely satisfied that you have rooted out this cancer from your organization, I will be activating the termination clause in our contract before lunch on Monday. We will move our business to one of your competitors by the end of the month. Am I clear? The threat wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. David Macmillan knew Robert Washington was a man of his word. He could already see the headlines, the board members' faces, the stock tickers glowing red. Crystal clear. Robert. David said, his voice now tight with urgency. You have my personal guarantee. This will be handled immediately. I am so sorry. Don't be sorry, David. Robert said, his voice softening for the first time, but with a chilling finality. Just fix it. He ended the call. He looked over at Maya, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. He gave her a small, sad smile. The first part was done. The consequences were now in motion, an avalanche starting from a single, quiet phone call. For Clare Henderson, stepping off the plane at Heathrow was a moment of triumph. She felt vindicated, powerful. She had faced down an arrogant, wealthy passenger and won. As she led her crew, Mark, the timid Chloe, and two others through the private corridors that connected the gate to the crew facilities, she was already regaling them with her version of the story. And then he has the nerve to demand to see the purser, as if that would scare me, she said with a dismissive laugh. Mark managed a weak smile, the guilt already churning in his gut. Chloe kept her eyes on the floor, wishing she could disappear. As they rounded the corner toward their debriefing room, they were met by a sight that stopped them cold. Waiting for them were two people in sharp business suits, a man and a woman from Trans-Atlantic's corporate HR department, flanked by two uniformed airport security officers. The woman head of human resources for UK operations held a stack of folders. Her expression was grim, a stark contrast to Clare's smugness. Clare Henderson, Mark Peters. Chloe Jensen. The HR woman asked, her voice clipped and official. The other two crew members were also named. Please come with me. We need to have a word. Clare's smirk faltered. What's this all about? We just finished a 9-hour flight. This can't wait, the woman replied, gesturing toward a sterile, windowless meeting room. The crew exchanged confused glances and followed her inside. The security officers remained outside the door. The moment the door clicked shut, the atmosphere changed from confusing to menacing. The HR woman, whose name was Patricia, didn't ask them to sit. She stood before them, her eyes like chips of flint. We have received a formal complaint regarding a serious incident that occurred on Flight 117 involving passenger Robert Washington and his daughter. Clare scoffed. Oh, for heaven's sake, that man is making a complaint. He was the one being aggressive. I was simply enforcing safety protocols. Patricia's gaze fell on Clare, and it was utterly devoid of sympathy. Ms. Henderson, according to the complaint you initiated, an unprovoked confrontation, screamed at a minor and made discriminatory and defamatory remarks regarding her and her father. That's a lie. Clare sputtered, her face turning red. Mark, tell her you were there. All eyes turned to Mark. This was his chance to tell the truth, to correct the record. He looked at Clare's furious face, then at Patricia's implacable one. The cowardice that had made him side with Clare on the plane took over once again. Things got a bit heated, he mumbled. The passenger was upset. Clare was just doing her job. Patricia's expression didn't change. She opened a folder. The complaint comes directly from Robert Washington, CEO of Innovate Solutions. Perhaps you are unaware, but Innovate Solutions is our single largest corporate partner. Their business is worth over $300 million annually to this airline. The complaint was made directly to our CEO, David Macmillan, less than 20 minutes ago. The air was sucked out of the room. Claire's face went from red to a pasty white. Mark felt a wave of nausea. $300 million. They hadn't just angered a passenger. They had threatened the foundation of the airline. Patricia continued, her voice cold and steady. Due to the severity of the allegations and the catastrophic potential damage to our company's reputation and financial stability, an immediate executive decision has been made. As of this moment, all of you are suspended without pay, pending a full investigation. Suspended, Claire shrieked. You can't do that. I have a union. Your union representative has already been notified, Patricia said flatly. They are welcome to participate in the investigation, which I assure you will be swift and thorough. You will hand over your airline identification and all company property now. You will then be escorted from the premises. It was happening too fast. The world was tilting on its axis. One moment, Claire was a queen in her cabin kingdom. The next, she was being stripped of her identity in a soulless corporate office. One by one, they placed their badges on the table. Chloe's hands were shaking so badly, she could barely unclip hers. The sound of the plastic hitting the wood laminate was like a gavel falling on their careers, as the security guards led them out through a back exit, avoiding the public terminals. The reality began to sink in. They were pariahs. Claire was still muttering about lawsuits and injustice. Mark was turned, his face ashen, the full weight of his spinelessness crashing down on him. He hadn't just lost his job. He had lost his self-respect. The swift and thorough investigation lasted less than 48 hours. By Sunday evening, each of them received an official email. The subject line was brutally direct. Termination of employment. The body of the email detailed that based on interviews with other first-class passengers who had corroborated Robert Washington's account, their actions constituted gross misconduct. Their careers with Trans-Atlantic Airways were over. For Claire, it was a declaration of war. For Mark, it was a life sentence. For Chloe, it was a devastating consequence for a moment of fear-induced silence. Their shared flight had ended, but their individual falls were just beginning. The firing of an entire flight crew was not a quiet event. Within a week, the story was leaked to aviation blogs and then to the mainstream media. The initial narrative, carefully spun by sources close to Claire Henderson, was one of corporate overreach. Veteran flight attendant, fired after clash. With billionaire CEO. One headline screamed, Claire, casting herself as the working-class victim, went on a minor media tour, giving interviews to sympathetic hosts where she decried cancel culture and the arrogance of the ultra-rich. This man, Robert Washington, thought he and his daughter were above the rules, she said on a popular right-wing podcast, her voice thick with manufactured sincerity. I was doing my job ensuring safety, and for that, my 22-year career was destroyed. They didn't just fire me. They fired my whole crew. It's a disgrace. For a fleeting moment, public opinion swayed in her favor. People railed against the faceless billionaire. But Robert Washington hadn't built a global empire by being stupid. He had anticipated this. He and his PR team remained silent, waiting. They knew the truth had more power than the lie. The tipping point came from an unexpected source. A passenger from Flight 117, a tech investor from Silicon Valley, who had witnessed the entire exchange, had been appalled by Claire's media tour. He had recorded a 45-second clip of the incident on his phone, capturing the moment Claire shrieked at Maya. Her face contorted with rage, her words about Maya not being able to afford her bag clearly audible. He posted it on X, formerly Twitter, with a simple caption, "The truth about TAA Flight 117. This wasn't about safety. It was about abuse. Clare Henderson lied. The video was explosive. It went viral overnight, garnering millions of views. The public saw not a calm professional, but an unhinged bully. They heard the undisguised venom and prejudice in her voice. The narrative collapsed instantly. Clare Henderson went from folk hero to pariah in the time it took to click retweet. Her podcast interviews were taken down. Her planned television appearances were cancelled. She became a meme for public meltdowns. But the consequences were only beginning. Trans-Atlantic Airways, in its frantic effort to appease Robert and innovate solutions, conducted a deep forensic audit on the fired employees. And in Clare's records, they found something more sinister than a bad attitude. They uncovered a pattern of unusual financial activity. This prompted them to subpoena her personal email and bank records as part of their internal lawsuit protection. What they found was a bombshell. A series of encrypted emails exchanged in the week prior to the flight between Clare Henderson and a senior project manager at Quantum Dynamics Innovate Solutions' fiercest competitor. The emails detailed a plan Clare was to identify Robert Washington and his daughter on the flight manifest and create a public, embarrassing incident. The goal was to paint Robert as an aggressive, entitled bully and generate negative PR for him and his company. In exchange, a sum of $54,000 was transferred to an offshore account in Clare's name. Quantum Dynamics, having recently lost a major defense contract to Innovate Solutions, was playing dirty. The incident was not a random act of prejudice. It was corporate sabotage. The airline immediately turned the evidence over to the FBI. What began as a termination of employment became a federal criminal investigation. Clare Henderson was arrested and charged with conspiracy wire fraud and defamation. Her life didn't just fall apart. It was systematically dismantled by the very scheme she had enacted. She lost her job, her reputation, and now her freedom. For Mark, the purser, the unraveling was quieter, but just as devastating. Blacklisted from all major airlines due to the high-profile nature of the firing, he couldn't find work. The shame of the incident, coupled with his unemployment, put an immense strain on his marriage. His wife, disgusted by his cowardice, which he finally confessed to her, left him. Unable to afford the mortgage on his own, he lost his house. 6 months after serving champagne in first class, he was stocking shelves on the night shift at a grocery store, haunted by the moment he chose the easy lie over the hard truth. Chloe, the junior attendant, was consumed by guilt. She knew her silence had made her complicit. Unable to live with it, she took a risk. She wrote a long, detailed letter to Robert Washington's corporate office, not asking for anything but simply to set the record straight. She detailed Clare's manipulation, Mark's weakness, and her own fear-frozen inaction. She apologized profusely to Maya, though she knew the girl would likely never see the letter. The letter landed on Robert's desk. He saw no malice in it, only regret and a desire for atonement. He was a man who believed in second chances, but only for those who earned them. He had his office reach out to Chloe. After a series of interviews where her sincerity and remorse were evident, he did something unexpected. He offered her an entry-level administrative position in the Innovate Solutions Foundation, his company's charitable arm, which focused on creating educational opportunities for underprivileged youth. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was a lifeline. It was a chance to build a new life, one founded on the painful lesson she had learned about the price of silence. 3 months later, London was painted in the melancholic golds and deep crimsons of late autumn. In a quiet corner of Hyde Park, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Maya Washington sat on a wooden bench, her beloved Leica camera not held up to her eye, but resting in her lap. Her gaze was fixed on the flow of humanity passing by a young mother, patiently negotiating with a determined toddler, an elderly man reading a newspaper with an expression of intense concentration, a pair of lovers whispering on a nearby bench, their laughter a fleeting puff of white in the cool air. She was no longer just looking. She was seeing. The incident on the plane had, after the initial shock and pain, irrevocably altered her perception. It was as if a filter had been removed from her eyes, forcing her to look beyond the surface of people and things. This new raw perception fueled her art. Her sketchbook was filled not with landscapes but with faces. Her new photography project, which she had tentatively titled The Unseen, was an attempt to capture the hidden stories etched into the lines of a stranger's face, the quiet resilience behind a tired expression, the flicker of hope in a worried glance, the weight of a secret carried in the slump of a shoulder. It was her way of turning a moment of profound humiliation into a study of shared humanity. Robert found her there, a silent figure wrapped in a grey wool coat, a stark contrast to the park's vibrant decay. He carried 2 paper cups of steaming hot chocolate, the sweet chocolatey scent, a comforting intrusion. As he approached, he felt a familiar pang, a mixture of awe and a lingering protective ache. He could still see her on the plane, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and the memory was a permanent scar on his own heart. Yet the young woman before him now possessed a serenity that seemed almost impossible. She had not simply endured, she had transformed. "Find any good shots?" he asked, his voice gentle, as he handed her a cup. Maya wrapped her cold hands around the warmth of the paper, offering him a small, genuine smile. "I think so. I'm more interested in the moments between the shots today." She gestured with her head toward the old man with the newspaper. "Look at his hands, the way he holds the paper. Decades of habit, decades of mornings just like this one. There's a whole life story right there." Robert followed her gaze, seeing the man not just as an anonymous figure, but through his daughter's eyes. "You see more than I do, superstar," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. They sat in a comfortable silence, sipping their drinks. The legal storm had moved into its final procedural phases. The news cycle had, as it always does, churned on to new outrages. But for Robert, the questions lingered. The immense power he had wielded that day still felt heavy in his hands. "I saw an article this morning," he said, breaking the quiet. "Harrison Croft's legal fees are astronomical. He's had to liquidate a significant portion of his stock in quantum dynamics. The company itself is facing shareholder lawsuits. His name is mud in the financial world." He paused, swirling the hot chocolate in his cup. "I find no satisfaction in that." He looked at Maya, his expression unusually vulnerable. "I've been thinking about it a lot. What I did, making that call, it was like using a tactical weapon to solve a fistfight. I brought the full weight of a global corporation down on one hateful woman and her crew. Was it justice, Maya? Or was it just overwhelming force?" It was a question he had wrestled with in the dead of night. He, a black man who had fought against entrenched systems his entire life, had become the system in that moment. The thought was deeply unsettling. Maya turned on the bench to face him fully. Her eyes, clear and perceptive, held no judgment. "I've thought about that too," she admitted. "What happened to Mark the purser? To the others who were just quiet? It's sad. But Dad, you didn't do it because you were powerful. You did it because you were a father. And what Clare Henderson did wasn't just a fist fight. It wasn't just mean words." She leaned forward, her voice earnest. She was counting on the fact that people like her always get away with it. She thought she could say that to me, and that we were just another nameless, faceless black family who would swallow the humiliation because we had no choice. She counted on the system protecting her. "You didn't use your power to be a bully. You used it to show her that the system she was counting on had a bigger, more important rule, that actions have consequences. You didn't make an example of her. Her own actions made an example of her." Hearing his own chaotic thoughts articulated with such simple, profound clarity by his daughter left Robert speechless. She had given him the absolution he hadn't known he was seeking. She had understood the core of it better than he had himself. And it wasn't all destruction, Maya added softly. What about Chloe Roberts' expression softened? "You're right." He told her then about a visit he'd made to the Innovate Solutions Foundation a week prior. They were holding a coding workshop for teenagers from low-income housing projects. And there was Chloe in the middle of it all. Not hiding in a corner, but handing out tablets, helping a kid who was frustrated with a line of code, her face lit up with purpose. She told me she's enrolled in night classes, studying to be a social worker. She said for the first time in her life, she feels like she's a part of something that builds people up, instead of just serving them. He shook his head in wonder. That one phone call led to that, too. The bad choices of Claire and Mark had led to their ruin. The fearful choice of Chloe, followed by the brave choice to atone, had led to her rebirth. It wasn't karma, it was cause and effect, a brutal and sometimes beautiful moral calculus. A cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead, showering them in a flurry of gold. Maya leaned her head on her father's shoulder, the gesture both childlike and deeply comforting. The scars from that day would likely never fade completely, but they were no longer open wounds. They had become part of their story, a testament to their resilience and a reminder of the complex world they navigated together. The rage had subsided, the fear had receded, and what was left was a quiet, unshakable love and a shared understanding. "Are you okay?" he asked, the same question he'd asked her on the plane, the words now imbued with months of history. Maya looked up, her smile reaching her eyes a beacon against the fading afternoon light. "I am now, Dad," she said, her voice full of a newfound certainty. "We're okay." And in the heart of London, surrounded by the gentle dying of the year, it felt like a new beginning. 6 months after their quiet moment in Hyde Park, the polished tranquility of Robert Washington's London townhouse was disrupted by a thick manila envelope delivered by a courier. It bore the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice. Inside, the formal language of the subpoenas was cold and absolute. Robert and Maya Washington were being called to testify as the primary witnesses in the federal case against Clare Henderson and Harrison Croft. Robert read his copy, his jaw tightening with each word. The trial was to be held in the Southern District of New York, a place freighted with memory. He had expected this, of course. It was the logical conclusion of the investigation his call had set in motion. Yet seeing it in black and white, seeing Maya's name on a legal document that would force her back into the vortex of that day, ignited his protective instincts into a raging fire. He found Maya in her study, a sun-drenched room overlooking a quiet garden. She was sketching, her brow furrowed in concentration. The sketchbook was filled with charcoal portraits, faces of strangers she'd seen on the street, each one imbued with a powerful, unspoken story. She had found her voice in her art, a way to process the world's complexities without having to speak. "They've summoned us," he said, his voice softer than he intended. He laid the subpoena on the edge of her desk. Maya looked at it, her pencil hovering over the paper. She read the document without expression, her calm a stark contrast to the tempest inside her father. For a long moment, she said nothing. "You don't have to do this," Maya Robert said quickly, stepping forward. "I can have the lawyers fight it. We can cite emotional distress trauma. You're a minor. I can testify for both of us. You don't ever have to see her again." He would burn millions in legal fees to spare her this. Maya finally looked up from the page, and her eyes were not those of a frightened girl. They were clear, steady, and held a depth that seemed years older than 17. "No, Dad," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I do have to do this. If I don't, it'll feel like she won. Like I'm still that scared girl on the plane, hiding by the window." She placed her pencil down with deliberate care. "I need to finish it." Robert looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and saw that the girl he was trying to protect had already become a woman. The strength he had always wished for her had taken root in the most painful of circumstances. His fear for her was eclipsed by an immense, swelling pride. "Okay," he nodded, the single word carrying the weight of his full support. "Okay, superstar. We'll finish it together." The courtroom was an imposing theater of mahogany and marble, designed to make individuals feel small in the face of the law. Clare Henderson sat at the defense table looking diminished. The severe chignon was gone, replaced by limp, unremarkable hair. Her face was pale, etched with bitterness. Beside her, his expensive suit looking more like a costume, was Harrison Croft, the former CEO of Quantum Dynamics. He exuded an aura of entitled disbelief, as if the entire proceeding were a vulgar misunderstanding that would soon be corrected. The first few days of the trial were a dry procession of FBI agents and financial experts detailing the intricate web of conspiracy the Shell Corporation, the offshore wire, transfers the encrypted emails. The evidence was damning, a clinical portrait of corporate malice. But the prosecution knew the jury needed more than data. They needed to understand the human cost, and for that, they called their first witness of character, Mark Peters. When Mark walked toward the witness stand, he seemed to have aged a decade in less than a year. His gait was a shuffle, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. His ill-fitting suit was a rental, a stark cry from the crisp purser's uniform he had once worn with pride. He avoided looking at anyone, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if the answers were written on the polished tiles. The prosecutor began gently establishing his 24-year career with Trans-Atlantic, his role as purser, his responsibilities. Then he moved to Flight 117. "Mr. Peters, can you describe the interaction you witnessed between your lead attendant, Ms. Henderson, and the passenger, Maya Washington?" Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He cleared his throat. "There was a disagreement about a bag." His voice was raspy, unused. A disagreement the prosecutor prodded. "Could you be more specific? Who initiated it?" Mark's eyes flickered toward Clare for a fraction of a second. He saw the cold warning in her gaze. But then he glanced toward the gallery and saw Robert Washington sitting ramrod straight, his expression unreadable. He saw the empty seat beside him waiting for his daughter. The shame that had been his constant companion for months crested into a wave. He could not lie here. Not again. Claire, he said the words coming out in a rush. Miss Henderson. The bag was already under the seat. It wasn't a safety issue. I've seen hundreds of bags like it. She targeted the girl. A murmur went through the courtroom. Claire's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. Speculation about my client's motives. Sustained, the judge said calmly. Mr. Peters, stick to what you saw and heard. The prosecutor nodded. What did you hear Ms. Henderson say to Maya Washington? Mark's face crumpled. He looked at his hands twisting in his lap. She got loud. She accused her of being careless. When Mr. Washington intervened, she got worse. She started screaming. He took a shaky breath. She yelled that people pay thousands for a ticket and not to be bothered by teenagers with bags they probably couldn't even afford. The words hung in the silent courtroom, as ugly and raw as they had been at 30,000 feet. And what did you do? Mr. Peters, the prosecutor, asked, his voice now like a surgeon's scalpel. Mark's composure broke. A dry sob escaped him. Nothing, he whispered, his voice cracking. I did nothing. He asked for my help. He told me she was lying, and he was right. She was. But I backed her up. I took her side. It was easier. I was a coward. He finally looked at the jury, his eyes pleading for an understanding he knew he didn't deserve. I lost everything because of that moment. My job, my pension, my wife, my self-respect. And I deserved it. I deserved all of it. He was dismissed shortly after, a man hollowed out by his own moral failure. His testimony had been devastating, not just for Claire's defense, but as a portrait of complicity. He had not been a villain, but his weakness had allowed villainy to flourish. The next morning it was Maya's turn. She walked to the witness stand with a composure that stunned her father. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. She looked young, but not fragile. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the prosecutor waiting. He led her through the events gently, his voice soft. He asked about her love for photography, about her camera. He asked about the flight, about Claire's initial tone. Maya answered each question with a quiet, unwavering clarity. Her voice never faltered. Then came the cross-examination. Claire's lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Mr. Davies, approached the stand. His strategy was clear: to portray Maya as an out-of-touch entitled princess, a snowflake, for whom a simple request from a flight attendant was grounds for a corporate meltdown. Miss Washington Davies began, his tone dripping with condescension. You fly first class often, don't you? When I fly with my father. Yes, Maya replied. So you're used to a certain level of service. People fetching you drinks, catering to your whims. I'm used to people being polite, Maya corrected him calmly. And when Ms. Henderson, a 22-year veteran of the airline, made a simple safety request, you found that impolite. It wasn't a simple safety request, Maya said, her gaze steady. It was an order about a bag that posed no danger. And her tone was not polite. Ah, her tone, Davies scoffed. So this is all about her tone. You and your father, a man who controls a multi-billion-dollar company, decided to ruin a woman's life over her tone of voice. Objection, the prosecutor said wearily. Argumentative, sustained. "Mr. Davies, watch yourself." Davies circled back. "Ms. Henderson claims you were careless with your bag, that you struck another passenger. Did that happen?" My bag gently tapped a man's arm as I was complying with her order to move it. He said it was no problem at all. She then began to scream at me. "Scream!" Davies raised an eyebrow. Or was it a raised voice? It can get loud on an airplane. Perhaps you, being a sensitive artistic type, perceived it as screaming when it was merely a firm instruction. This was the moment. This was the pivot point where the old Maya might have faltered, might have doubted her own memory. But the girl on the stand was not the same. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking with Davies's. "Miss Davies," she said, her voice dropping, forcing everyone in the court to lean in to listen. She didn't just raise her voice. Her face was an inch from mine. I could feel her breath. She called me careless. She called me a danger. But that's not what I'll remember. She paused, turning her head slightly to look at the 12 faces in the jury box. What I will remember is when she looked at my clothes and my camera and my father, and she told me I had a bag I probably couldn't even afford. She wasn't talking about the bag. She was telling me that I didn't belong there, that because of the way I look, I couldn't possibly have earned my place in that seat. She tried to make me feel worthless, small, invisible. She took a breath, her voice gaining a strength that resonated through the silent room. "You asked if we ruined her life over her tone. We didn't do anything. My father made one phone call to report an act of abuse and a criminal conspiracy. Miss Henderson did this to herself. Her hate did this. Her greed did this. All her choices led her right to that chair." She finished speaking and leaned back. A profound silence fell over the courtroom. She hadn't just recounted events. She had articulated the soul of the offense. She had given a voice to the sting of prejudice, a feeling every single person on the jury, in their own way, could understand. She had not been a victim on the stand. She had been a teacher. Mr. Davies stood frozen for a moment, before muttering, "No further questions." The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty. On all counts for both Clare Henderson and Harrison Croft. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, defamation, corporate sabotage. Croft's face was a mask of grey disbelief. Clare stared straight ahead, a single furious tear finally tracing a path down her cheek, before she hardened her expression into a mask of stone. The consequences had arrived final and irrevocable. Outside the courthouse, a frenzy of reporters shouted questions. Robert wrapped a protective arm around Maya, guiding her through the throng toward their waiting car. They didn't say a word. Inside the car, as it pulled away from the curb and the noise of the media circus faded, Maya let out a long, slow breath, a breath it seemed she had been holding for 8 months. The tension flowed out of her shoulders. She didn't look triumphant or happy. She looked peaceful. She turned to her father, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. The legal battle was won, the culprits held to account. But the victory felt sober, not sweet. The scars of the experience would always be a part of her, a reminder of a world that could be cruel and unjust. But they were her scars now. She owned them. They no longer had any power over her. "Let's go home, Dad," she said softly. Robert reached over and squeezed her hand, his heart overflowing. "We are," he replied, and for the first time in a long time, the word felt completely true. Thank you for watching this story of justice consequences and the hidden complexities behind a single, shocking event. What began with a moment of cruel prejudice on Flight 117 didn't just end with a firing. It unraveled a web of corporate conspiracy and personal failings. It showed us that true power isn't about shouting the loudest, but about knowing precisely when and where to apply pressure. It's a stark reminder that our actions and our inactions create ripples that can grow into tidal waves capable of washing away careers, reputations, and entire lives. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of real-life drama and its ultimate consequences. What are your thoughts on Robert's actions? Let us know in the comments below.